and ask the pharmacist for an extra 30-day supply if possible. Over-the-counter medicines for reducing fever and cough are also a good idea, but you should always check with the doctor before giving anyone medication. Make a plan to stay connected. To prevent social isolation, set up available technology to help loved ones stay connected. Schedule regular video chats, phone calls, or texts with family members and friends. Cards and gifts, when delivered safely, can help brighten a day. Finally, maintain your own self-care and safety. Remember to care for yourself while caring for others. Follow the CDC guidelines for coronavirus safety. For high-risk individuals, such as those with dementia and underlying health conditions, consider self-isolating with them. Have a backup plan for care in case you become ill. For more tips on caregiving during the coronavirus pandemic, go to aarp.org/caregiving.
I was searching for something that would add meaning to my life.
I want to do what a hero does.
Can I fix your napkins? You touch me and you're in a lot of trouble. Sorry.
It seemed like I heard a voice saying, "This is your calling."
I can teach you a jump that I do.
Okay, please.
What are the other 65-year-old people doing?
Hey Dad, just checking in on you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
I'll be back with groceries.
Hi, Mommy. How does the mask fit? Hey, it's good.
Hola, ¿estás tomando café?
It wasn't that long ago that we could go out and enjoy live music and dancing. Not only is it fun, but studies have shown that music can reduce stress, improve your mood, build social connections, and take your mind off things for a while. So AARP is bringing concerts to you with performances by some of the best artists. Watch from the comfort of your home, let the music move you, and maybe even dance your heart out. We'll be going to concerts again before we know it. Meanwhile, AARP is still your source for the most important information about the pandemic when you need it. Plus tools like Community Connections, a platform that helps you find support in your area. The coronavirus crisis will end. Until then, AARP is committed to helping you stay safe and connected through the days ahead.
Welcome. The virtual event will begin shortly. Let's get to know the virtual event environment. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a row of icons, each with a unique function. Icons vary from event to event, so you may see some or all of the icons covered in this video. This is the Restore icon. It will restore all of the windows to their original positions. The video and slides icons allow you to minimize each window and customize your screen. Click on the group chat icon to connect with other attendees. The Q&A icon is where you can ask questions to the speaker or ask for technical help. Just type your question into the box and submit. You'll see a brief confirmation message when you do. Click on the summary icon to read the event summary and on the speaker icon to learn more about the event speakers. When you click on the resources icon, you'll find additional information pertaining to the event. And last but not least, if real-time closed captioning is available, use this icon to follow along throughout the event. If you have technical difficulties, here are a few tips that can solve some of the most common issues. If you don't see the video or hear the audio, try refreshing your browser. If you can't hear the presenter, verify that your speakers are turned on and the volume is turned up. The platform works best when watching on a computer or laptop, not on a smartphone or tablet. If you have a weak internet connection, try connecting directly to your router with an Ethernet cable. And don't worry if you miss something, because you can view a recording of the event later. All attendees will receive a thank you email following the event with the information you need to view the recording on demand. Enjoy the event!
Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the hosts of today's event, AARP, Blue Ridge Pride, and our featured guests, Stu Maddox and Val Walker. Gosh, so much of the past year has been focused outwardly on worldly events, notably COVID-19 pandemic. Today, I'm going to invite all of us to take a look inwardly, acknowledge and empathize with our internal experience. At the same time, we really hope that you feel a sense of connection and possibilities right here in this virtual event, and ideally extending into your lives. While we don't need a survey to tell us that the pandemic has caused an increase in social isolation, that is what the survey says. More than half of adults 50 and older have reported social isolation, defined as the absence of meaningful relationships during the pandemic. This is an event for everyone. At the same time, we know that family caregivers and people in the LGBTQ community have compounding factors that may increase the experience of social isolation and loneliness. Therefore, we will include specific resources and context for members of these communities, in addition to all of us. I hope that that information in the tech overview was helpful for you. If you have questions at any point about the online platform, you can use that chat feature. You can also use the chat to start to build a sense of community here, and I see some of you have already done that. It's really fun, responding to our questions, providing insights and comments. This is an interactive event, and we want to hear from you. You can ask questions just to our speakers by posting them in the Q&A box. So just to review, Q&A is just for speakers. Chat will be seen by everyone. All right, so based on this interactive idea, we'd like to start with a question for you. It was mentioned in our registration that some of you are caregivers. So let's see who's in the room. You'll see a box there. You can make the box bigger if you'd like. There it is. Which of the following best describes you? So if you're not right at your computer, hop over and respond to this question. We want to know who's with us today in terms of caregiving. Are you a full-time caregiver, part-time caregiver, long-distance caregiver? You were a caregiver, you have not been a caregiver, maybe you're a care recipient, and maybe you don't know. You can click on more than one. I'll give you just a few more seconds. We really do want to know who's here with us in the room. So give us an opportunity to know you by clicking on what is relevant to you. And we'll give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we will close that survey. And you know, it looks like there is a good percentage of people here, almost 50%, who have not been caregivers yet. And the reason we frame it that way is because that we know that most people are either a caregiver or a care recipient at some point in our lives. So hopefully you will see the lens of caregiving as being relevant. Now I'm going to go ahead and invite my friend, my ally. Oh, he also happens to be an award-winning producer and director of nonfiction media, Stu Maddox, to join me here.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, Stu. So this caregiving question, what have you found to be true about loneliness and caregiving, the relationship between those two things?
Well, first, let me just thank you for bringing us back. We've had a decade now and 3 different projects working together to create change in communities. So Rebecca, it's so great to see your energy. Your question is really great. And I answered the survey, have been a caregiver and will be a caregiver, because I was for a short time and I expect to be on a longer term basis later. What I've learned in documenting these stories of people who've opened their lives is that the moment of caregiving is critical as in terms of social isolation. For some of the folks we've been following, we've seen them grow their social network and their safety net. For others, we've seen it disappear completely in that process, coming out the other end and having no one left. So the caregiving moment in life, like so many other moments, is an important one in terms of social isolation.
Wow. Thank you. I appreciate that. For some people, it can make their world bigger, and for others, maybe not necessarily. I guess I'm curious about how someone can feel, and I kind of know the answer, but want to hear your perspective. How can we feel lonely when we're right there with another person, maybe all the time as a full-time caregiver?
Well, as one subject says, life is not made up of just one relationship. And in fact, statistics show that more than half of couples, one or the other, identifies as chronically lonely, possibly socially isolated. So we need meaningful and multiple relationships in our lives as human beings. And the caregiving experience is exhausting, as we all know. And we need emotional and mental support through that.
Oh, yeah. Now I'm starting to think of some people in my life who I think can really relate to that experience. So it's a good reminder, if this isn't relevant to you right now, the chances are there's someone in your circle and network who it's very relevant for. I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away, Stu, and introduce our first clip.
Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate the bio. I think what was not in the wonderful introduction you did is that I identify as one of the chronically lonely and socially isolated out there. And I'm just a normal person. I didn't realize it until we started this project. I have people in my life. I'm married. I consider myself to have a pretty well-rounded life. And yet I'm like millions of us who want to have more meaningful relationships. And especially right now, as we're coming out of the pandemic. So I'm outing myself. I am lonely. That's not easy to say. I'm aging and I'm a little worried about it. So that's why we made this film, is to break the stigma of saying I'm lonely and I need help, and hopefully empower communities and have conversations like this to kind of share ideas about how we insulate ourselves from it. Many of you know us from our LGBT aging film, Gen Silent, but with this film, everybody's affected. And we are following people from all walks of life who have bravely opened their lives to us and are sharing their stories. So this evening, we'll hear how they're dealing with it. We'll have lots of useful info from our subject matter expert, Val Walker, in just a minute. We're also going to assess our own loneliness with a short loneliness quiz. So get a pen and paper ready. That's really interesting. And one other thing, I need your help. We are editing this film as we speak. So be a part of the collaborative process with me and let me know what you think of these clips in the chat. What you don't like, the constructive criticism is valuable. What you do like, who would use this film? And if you agree with one of the comments, chime in with a yes, I agree with that, because we're looking for trends as well. So with that said, here's a short look at the trailer to start our conversation.
Every sunrise is a rude awakening for a faceless sculpture in an alley of Liverpool. She always gets visits, but no one stays for long.
And here we have the Eleanor Rigby statue on our right-hand side. And this was put here in 1980.
The chorus in that famous Beatles song seems to be coming true. The next global epidemic appears to be one of loneliness and isolation. This is where 2 filmmakers start their journey to document how millions will survive the loneliness left by COVID.
I isolated myself because I thought that's what I had to do
to survive.
Before the epidemic, social isolation was already a problem, and 3 in 5 of us said we were lonely most of the time.
There's evidence to suggest that it is increasing.
Social distancing and quarantines are now threatening the rest of us.
And it leads to a number of very serious health risks.
For the most vulnerable, you can't afford to write this off. It's really dangerous.
Loneliness is leading to serious health problems, and like COVID, it doesn't discriminate.
It is not okay that we don't learn about this in medical school. We have to have this integrated into healthcare.
But a few of us have found a way out. A teen who can no longer be close to her friends. A parent at home with her daughter.
Loneliness comes with having a child.
An artist living in a city of millions.
I mean, are there like over 600 people in this building? And I don't know many of them.
A couple in the wilderness of Alaska.
I do love you and I want our relationship to work.
And I know you do.
It all revolves around this lack of any connection outside of us as a couple.
They all find their own unique way out of crippling isolation.
The answer's probably not completely what you expect.
People ready to share with us how they returned from years of loneliness into lives that are whole.
I'm living again.
We've raised that kind of conversation, that national conversation.
But you live on your own now, don't you?
Yes, I do. I lost my husband and he died of Alzheimer's.
We need their answers now before it's too late for the rest of us. But each of their ways out started the same way. They had to reveal to the world that they were lonely.
There's got to be something wrong with you.
Yeah, there's a stigma.
Yes, it's god awfully embarrassing admitting it.
And I think once you admit that, that's like everything else will fall into place.
So now it's our turn. We're the filmmakers. Why are we on this journey? Because we're lonely. We're part of all the lonely people.
So that's been our life for the last 2 or 3 years. And I invite you just for an hour or two to come down that road with us. And it winds through the UK, Japan, mostly winds through the United States. And one of the stops along the way has been meeting Val Walker. She's the author of the book, 400 Friends and No One to Call. I love that title. She's done a lot of speaking and researching on this subject, lots of ideas. But as she likes to put it, always reminding me, I've done a lot of research, but I've also done a lot of soul searching. Is that how you describe yourself, Val?
Absolutely.
So, Val, it seems like we should start with an understanding of the difference between loneliness and isolation. Can you bring us up to speed on that?
I'll put it in a nutshell. Isolation is a lack of contact or a lack of access to contact. So, for example, if we lack transportation, we lack access to contact, and so we're isolated. So think of isolation as having a barrier that keeps us from contact. Voila, the pandemic, right? And then loneliness is more of an internal response known by social scientists as perceived isolation. So it's how you look at things and feel different, feel isolated from others. We can feel isolated even if we have people around us, even loving people around us. If we're going through something in our life that makes us feel different or ashamed, or we're dealing with an issue that might be stigmatized, we might feel that we're misunderstood. And that is just one of many causes of feeling lonely. And so it's important to see that loneliness has more to do with how you feel and how you look at things. And isolation is a real actual, a true, real force in your life.
So where do we start to do something about it in our own lives?
I think it begins, it's easy to say this, but it begins with when you notice you're lacking friends or you're lacking support. Let's say you don't have the family or the friends you think you should have. You're feeling lonely. You're not getting the support you want. It's really easy, especially in our social media culture, to think it's all about you. You know, I must have done something wrong. Why didn't those people show up? They promised to show up. What happened? Must be something I did. We often blame ourselves. And unfortunately, that whole idea of fixing yourself, you know, in our self-help mentality, we sometimes miss the whole big picture because it really is a social epidemic. It's a socioeconomic problem, it's a health problem, and it's so much more than just about you. So one of the most important things you can do, and some of your subjects in the film are able to show us, is that we have a place in ourselves where we stop feeling ashamed. We stop blaming ourselves. We stop thinking something's wrong with us, and somehow we're able to shift our attitude and go, I'm going to do something about this. I know other people are lonely out there too, and you become proactive. In fact, guess what? I'm one of the lonely people, just like you, but I also became an advocate for lonely people. And that's helped me break out of my isolation, is taking the role of an advocate to help others who are maybe even more lonely than I am. So I want to really emphasize that when you embrace and befriend that loneliness, you can actually turn it around and take a different attitude. And it starts with that even before you start connecting with others.
So let me bring in Rebecca if I could. So Rebecca, are you seeing lots of opportunities start to grow to reconnect out there where you are?
I'm noticing that the opportunities are growing, but I also notice that there's a reticence to actually be in physical proximity with one another. So, you know, one of the things that's really striking me about what Val said is this distinction between loneliness and social isolation. And I've noticed within myself that I have more of an episodic loneliness, like it'll come like a wave and then it passes too. Is there anything, Val, that in your research that talks about that episodic loneliness and people knowing they can get to the other side?
I think one way to look at it is look at a situation that has an isolating impact on you. A situation, a life situation. We can be in a situation of having an illness, or we can be in a situation of going through loss or grief, or having lost a job. When we're in a situation where we're caught up in, say, our own survival mode, we can feel really isolated from others. And just life situations can make us lonely. For example, I was more lonely when I lived in rural Maine, which I loved for many years. And then I realized, you know what? I have to move to Boston. I need to be somewhere where I can meet people more like me who don't have children, who aren't married, who are baby boomers, who may not have those grandkids, you know. So I was finding when you change your, even the city or town where you live, or you change your life situation. So loneliness is often a result of an isolating situation in your life.
Yeah, that's very useful. And it really brings me back to your question, Stu, a little bit too about my experience in our community about people feeling comfortable kind of connecting again. And I think that's somewhat situational too, you know, based on our age, based on the people around us and what they think and do. So the situational piece is great. If anyone has a comment or a question, I want to invite you to now's your chance. You know, we have this opportunity to share with Stu and Val. I have one more question for you, Stu. Well, one more right now, and that is about like in your own journey of acknowledging your loneliness and that being the first step. How has this film and the path that it's provided you taken? Where has it taken you? What tools are you gathering?
Oh, what a great question. I'm still kind of building my toolbox, but I would say the inner journey that hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about a little bit. No matter how many outside opportunities there are, you said it a little bit at the beginning, there is an inner part of this. It's an inside job, and we keep hearing that a lot, and I didn't really believe it, but I do now. So yeah, working on the inside has been the hardest part. And this loneliness quiz that we're going to take later on, I've taken it at the beginning of this journey, and I took it just as late as yesterday. And so it's like your credit score. It's like really tough to change, but you can do this if you work at it. Would you like me to segue into the next clip?
Yeah, perfect. I think that's perfect.
Okay.
Thanks.
So to build on what you were saying, we found in our documenting, we were talking about caregiving, how invisible you can be as a caregiver. And you talked a little bit about the situational ways that you can be lonely too. There are a lot of situations and groups of people who are more vulnerable to social isolation. For example, the LGBTQ community, anytime you're part of a group that may be perceived as different where you are, if you have a hearing impairment, if you have a mobility issue, if you have a mental difference, if you have a lower income that doesn't even allow you to get out and just volunteer and reconnect, or even like me, if you are introvert, that's all okay, but we do have to watch it a little bit more carefully. So let's take a look at this next clip from All the Lonely People. And please, again, put your critic's cap on and let me know what you think. This is Paula and Andrea. They are a couple living in a very conservative and remote part of Alaska. In the last couple of years, they have both become disabled. And because of their social isolation, they are both caregiving for each other.
Wasilla definitely is an ultra conservative. Place, and that's part of what made it so. Scary and difficult. Kind of scary and difficult. We grew as a couple. Well, Yeah, 10 years ago in a week.
I know.
But we didn't grow into our community because we weren't really welcomed in our community.
10 years ago in a
we
week.
weren't desired. But we didn't grow into our community because we weren't really welcome.
You know, I mean, it's not like
we weren't
I was
desired.
never on the PTA. There was just no way. You know, it wasn't like I was going to be on the school board. I mean, it's not like I was never on the PTA. You can't really put yourself out there, so there's just no way.
And for all of you, you may not know the history of this.
Wasn't like I was going to be on the school board.
This is actually our 5th conference on LGBTQ
I always felt that you can't really put yourself
and aging. And you know, we
have found in our projects that LGBTQ people are at greater risk of social isolation and
for all of you,
loneliness.
you may not know the history of this, but this is
And part of
actually
it is
our
that
5th
many of the
conference on
LGBTQ older
LGBTQ
adults have really had to
health
hide
and
their lives. aging. This
And,
creates a we have vulnerability found in our for social projects that isolation. LGBTQ Many people have are not at greater disclosed their risk identities of to social others, isolation except for to and very close loneliness. friends. This leaves And people part of it is very that vulnerable many of the without LGBTQ a older safety net. adults have really had to hide their lives.
Advice to not be lonely. We have to go back 20 years and make different decisions.
What decisions?
This
To be
creates
more
a
out there.
vulnerability
To be on
for
the
social
PTA.
isolation.
Be on the PTA.
Many
to be
have not
scrutinized
disclosed
and
their
be okay
identities
with
to others,
Do you
except
think
for
it's
to
too
very
late
close
now?
friends.
For me, yes.
This leaves people very vulnerable without a safety net.
But I don't think Paula's
Advice
doing
to not
very
be
well.
lonely. We have to go back 20 years and make
She's a
different
lot
decisions.
more falls, and she's having problems with driving and things that she could do before if she was careful. She really shouldn't do it all now.
To be more out there.
To be on the PTA.
Be on the PTA.
To be scrutinized and be okay with it.
Do you think it's too late now?
For me, yes. But I don't think Paula's doing very well. She has a lot more falls, and she's having problems with driving and things that she could do before if she was careful. She really shouldn't do it all now.
So apologies for the little technical snafus there, but please do be a part of the shaping of this film and share what you liked about that clip, maybe what you'd like to see more of. And I got to say, it was AARP Alaska that connected us to Paula and Andrea. And you may have recently seen an article in AARP, the magazine, about them as well and their journey. So, Val, how do those of us, I guess it's pretty much all of us now, who are more vulnerable, take care of ourselves?
That Paula and Andrea said. She said to be scrutinized and be okay with it, you know? Like, what is it taking us to give us that courage or that wherewithal to go into a group of people where they're going to check us out? Now, I did a lot of reading on this, study on this, and the social scientists call this the social evaluative threat. And it really is just basically social judgment. And there's an enormous stress response when it's like when you're public speaking. They're all checking you out and it's big time pressure, right? So you have such a huge rush of stress hormones in your body. It's so uncomfortable that a lot of people don't want to put themselves out there and feel that discomfort, that awkwardness. It's really true that when we are not in the practice of interacting with other people, just like any kind of conditioning, our social muscles don't get used and they kind of atrophy. And then not only have you become sort of atrophied about, ooh, I don't know how to talk to people anymore, you kind of get rusty, right? But on top of that, you've got this enormous rush of stress when people are judging you, or especially if you've had bad experiences of being shunned or judged by groups in the past. And it doesn't take much to mess that whole desire to go back out there and put yourself out there again. And that's a lot of the reason we're all doing this group tonight, is to say, what can it take from you, just like to push through, to be scrutinized and be okay with it, as Paula and Andrea. What's going to make us be able to get through that hurdle of people checking us out and judging us, or get through the hurdle of being rejected, or also just the awkwardness of just not forgetting how to just make small talk or even chat about something important.
Oh.
Rebecca, I just want to jump in and say I'm reading so many articles right now about reentry fear. This atrophying that you're talking about, Val, of our social skills. And yes, I sometimes would rather stay in at this point. Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
Wow, that is, I can relate to that, the desire to stay with what's comfortable, and definitely having a little bit of resistance to small talk more so than ever. So another thing that's on my mind is just kind of a developmental aspect of aging. So on one hand, as we age, many people become increase in their resilience and their, kind of have more of an internal sense of control over the years. In another sense, socially, we become more invisible as we age, and oftentimes. Of course, that's not true, but there's a perception of that. There's a social stigma around aging. So I'm kind of weighing those things out, thinking, of some older adults I know who really don't care much what other people think of them. And at the same time, how the social stigma of aging can actually, and if you also happen to be a caregiver in the LGBTQ community, how that can make us go back into our shell. And in some ways, that could really compound on us. So those are the thoughts that I'm having right now. And I see some questions here in the chat, so I also want to dive into those. Maybe they'll interrelate a little bit. So in your research, Val, have you found faith communities to be helpful, and if so, how?
It's one of the best. Many people say find people who have common interests. I'm thinking of Paula and Andrea, or thinking of couples that have a lot of barriers, health problems, money problems, LGBTQ issues, all separating them. But what will help pull you out of your shell so much can be not just a common interest, but common cause or common value. And in our spiritual communities, our faith communities, there we have a sense of really relating through our values. And values can sort of be a faster lane to trusting and building a relationship with somebody than just talking about your interests. So I notice with older people, generally having good heart-to-heart, deeper conversations around your values really tends to pull a lot of people out of their shell more than just, going to a ball game or something. So let me just put it out there that the faith-based community is a marvelous way to be more authentic, values-oriented in making connections.
Reminds me of kind of going deeper than the small talk. In that way, you can avoid it altogether. Another question that's coming up here, which actually leads to our next poll question, is can you talk about the difference between being alone and loneliness?
Well, I want to make one other thing added quickly to a sense of meaningfulness, a sense of meaning. Did you know that 53% of all adults in the US say, 53% say they don't believe they have meaningful conversations on a regular basis? Well, there are lots of social scientists who say maybe those smartphones are breaking up some of our conversations. We start to get into something and somebody picks up a phone. Did you know that the Pew Research Center said that just somebody picking up a phone, 83% of women over 50 actually do get upset? They reported that it does. So all those little experiences, if some people are picking up phones or they're not really tuning in and listening to you, you're not getting that sense of connection on a more meaningful basis. I want to say that really, and it's one of the many things that makes us feel lonely, especially as we age. We tend to yearn for more time for conversation. So conversation's been really quite, I'll say, intruded upon with social media and smartphones. Sherry Turkle, I recommend her book, Reclaiming Conversation. She really shows very well from MIT just how much even our conversations have been all chopped up and it makes us feel less connected in a lot of ways on day-to-day life.
I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to mention an upcoming intergenerational theater experience that's coming up that I just think that, when you talk about having space for like meaningful connection, we have this coming up. It's open to people across the state of North Carolina. And if my colleague is with us and can put some information in the chat about that. And there's also a North Carolina resource page under the resources where you'll see a link, because when Val's talking about how do we create spaces where we can go a little bit deeper and have those conversations, this is one of those spaces. So I want to mention that. And then I want to get back to this question that's great, the distinction between being alone and loneliness. Val, can you respond to that?
Yeah, and I did get off on that meaningful conversation, and that to me, what I should really steer it towards saying is that we can be alone and actually enjoy our alone time. Sometimes we need that downtime, and many introverted people also really enjoy that time. I certainly love to have time for writing and tuning out the rest of the world. So that said, we still also need to have deep connections with others, even if you are introverted. So being alone can actually be not lonely at all. A lot of people enjoy that time, that me time, a lot of people call it. That's pretty easy to say, but the pandemic has done some very interesting things with that. And we may find ourselves getting tired of certain ways of being alone. So there is a big difference between being alone, which is just fine. I moved up to Maine and lived there for many years where I wanted to be alone a lot, except with my cat and a lot of animals. And I really didn't need people very much. But as I aged and had some medical problems come into my life, I realized I couldn't live in that way anymore. So there's difference.
That really speaks to something Stu mentioned, just about aging and loneliness and that being its own unique circumstance. Because our cat couldn't take us to the emergency room or call the ER if we have a fall, unfortunately. Not yet. We do have a poll question to put up, and it relates to this question about alone versus loneliness. And I would love to hear from people here. Again, we want to hear from you. And this question, if somebody can put that up, how much time, thanks, do you get to yourself each week, not including sleeping? So maybe if you're a caregiver all the time, you really have like virtually no time. I know I've been there. Maybe you have a couple hours, or maybe it's kind of more unlimited to you, the time. I know this doesn't cover everybody, but just kind of a curiosity that we can be alone, but not necessarily lonely, and we can be lonely and not necessarily alone. So take a minute. If we just have, I'll give a 5 more seconds here to respond to this poll. 4, 3, 2, get your answers in now. 1. Okay. Wow. So this does reflect that there are most of the people here feel they have as much time as they want, and some people also, about a quarter of the people, really have kind of a short window of time between 1 and 5 hours to themselves each week. And part of the reason that we bring this up is about, so what is it that we do with the gift of time that we have? And we're going to talk more about some resources there. I'll invite Stu to come back and introduce for us the next clip.
So let's talk a little bit about someone whose gift of time kind of dwindled as he went through the caregiving process. Very familiar story. We all know someone like Victor, who was caregiving for his wife, and throughout their 30-year relationship, she was the one who really had most of the friendships, and she's gone now, and he's done his due caregiving, and now he's very socially isolated, but he's getting into the solution. Here's Victor.
The 2 ponds are like a photo album of memories, because you can look at a fish and you think, yeah, I remember when we bought that. I remember we fought over it. Have you ever had somebody really close to you like that? Imagine getting up one day and all you had left was the memories. I spent best part of 2 years nursing my wife at the end, and when it was all over, I found that I knew hardly anybody. Loneliness is what caused me to be the state I have been in mostly for the last 2.5 years nearly.
We all experience loneliness, it's part of our lives. But actually what we need to do is address those things that put it at risk to become something that is a chronic part of your life, a chronic condition, where you find it harder and harder to do anything about it.
I can't see me making a new circle of friends. I suppose there's more I could do. I sadly lack confidence. Right back to primary school, I used to get pushed around and bullied. I couldn't afford to spend money to meet new friends. Christmas, it's just another day.
Are you going to celebrate it in any way?
I'm going to meet up with an old friend of mine called Jack. Jack Daniels.
On Christmas.
Yep.
Starting at?
Oh, I should think when the eyelids open.
So Victor's solution is not that bottle you see on there. We're going to take a look, hopefully, at solutions for all the people you've seen. They really do get into action, but it's important to talk about how social isolation can really have a health impact as well. So that's part of the reason that we brought Victor into our discussion this evening. Val, what do you think?
I think of it, isolation as like a downward spiral, especially for a caregiver. I love when he said, when it was over, I hardly knew anybody. You know, he's been taking care of his wife for so long and just consumed by that. And he didn't have a chance to build a social life. And we tend to put our social life on the back burner. But you know what else often goes on the back burner is our self-care, our health. We tend to put ourselves way on the back burner for that. And then before you know it, we might be facing health problems that, you know, suddenly it may seem like that's a lot of work for us when we don't have any support around us. So I also want to say a few facts that are so important. There is a wonderful National Resource Center for aging LGBT groups through SAGE, S-A-G-E. It's a wonderful advocacy group, and I'm going to quote a few facts from that. You know, LGBT people are twice as likely to be living alone. And as far as all caregivers, a third of all full-time caregivers in the US are over 65 years of age. A third, over 65. So there are many older adults like Victor who are going to have probably more health-related issues as they become more lonely and isolated too. And as you saw, the alcohol. Also, LGBT people don't have, are 4 times less likely to have adult children who can help them. And also, LGBT people have typically built their families of choice around their caregiving needs, or their support groups have been often peers, often around the same age. And unfortunately, as everybody ages together, there's more sort of a vulnerable, fragile situation, because maybe so many of that circle of support you have are really having the same problems all at the same time you are. So what I'm going to open up and say is, the wider your networks, and if you can find groups like SAGE or the Family Caregiver Alliance, there are many groups through United Way and area associations on aging, AARP. There's so many ways to find local support in your area. Alzheimer's Society, you name it. So many medical conditions have societies. So many hospitals and hospices have medical social workers who help organize support groups. So I'm putting it out there. There really is some strong support out there, but it's linking that individual, that isolated individual. There's a great nationwide program called Health Leads that a lot of hospitals are using now. The Health Leads helps identify the more isolated people to reach out to them for medical care, especially if it's an isolated person in a hospital who doesn't have a spouse any longer, who's aging. More and more sensitivity to recognizing the isolated patients are going on out there. So Health Leads is something worth learning about, especially if you're in the healthcare profession. So there is support out there, but somebody needs to help guide that person to those supports.
Thank you for mentioning the resources. That was something when people registered for this event and we asked, what do you want to get out of this event? So many people said, like, resources. So I encourage you to check out the resource box. There is a great PDF handout from Val with some of this wisdom and very specific tips. a question that came up as Val was talking that's relevant, and it's for Stu. After hearing you speak before, I felt comfort in the idea that for LGBT folks, our caravan of support has lost a few wagons. Our caravan of support is thin, I think it says. Sorry, thank you. Can you talk about building up our caravans?
That's a great question, and yeah, as part of kind of the AIDS crisis generation on the tail end of that, it's easy to understand how these relationships that start our caravan of support. The caravan is like meeting through your entire life. They start when you're young, and for many people who are LGBTQ, particularly men who came from that era, their caravan has been thinned out because of that. So the question is, like, how do we pick up the slack now? And Rebecca, I guess I'm going to toss that back to you, because that's what I'm worried about now at age 55 is time is ticking, and I have done some life decisions which were all very good, like move for a job or get married or do all these things that you're supposed, that are normal things that have shrunk my caravan of support. And I have to say, that's not my word. You can Google that. It's a wonderful article that came out about how we maintain that. But I've been looking for volunteer opportunities. I've been looking for things that are people who believe things like me, like environmental things and stuff like that. I am going to put in a little plug for Effect to Connect because I have found some amazing volunteer opportunities there. And one is called, I'm totally digressing, but I got to tell you about Magic Wheelchair, which is something I want to try. This is a group that takes kids' wheelchairs and they make costumes for it. That's what I want to be doing. That's where I'm going to find my friends and rebuild literally my caravan of support, making costumes for kids' wheelchairs, turning them into motorcycles and things like that. So I think it's just finding what we like doing and others like that. It's a long answer. Sorry, Rebecca.
You tried to toss it back to me, but I think you answered it very well. And I think I will pick up some of those threads too after we complete the next part of our section, and that is the loneliness quiz. Get your pen and paper out, everyone, if you brought those with you.
Okay, so I'm excited to be the question asker on this. So what we're going to do, first of all, I'll tell you this is based on the UCLA loneliness quiz. It's not diagnostic. It's just a good baseline way to start to determine where you might stand on a scale. So we're going to ask 10 questions. You'll be able to score each one. If I can show you the first slide now, each question will be answered with a 1, 2, 3, or 4. And it'll correspond to the questions never, always, sometimes, or often. And while we're getting our technical glitch worked out, Val, you ran into this quiz very, very early on in your research, right?
Yeah, I've got a little backstory about that. I want to tell a teeny little story, and it was the reason I ended up writing my book, 400 Friends and No One to Call. And the reason I started Googling for what is loneliness out there, because once in 2012, I had a hysterectomy. I had lined up a couple of friends to help take care of me, help get me out of the hospital after the surgery, and help take care of me when I went home. And I was 58 years old. And after that happened, my friends didn't show up. For some reason, I couldn't understand it. I got a text from them saying, family emergency, we can't show up. So I was stranded in the hospital, and I really had a wake-up call realizing, gosh, I can't find anybody to help me get out of here. And anyway, the story goes on that finally somebody at about 1 a.m, a friend of a friend of a friend, helped me out. And I started in all my self-pity and shame of going, oh my God, what's happened to all my friends? It turned out one of my friends had had an opioid crisis in her family, which she had kept hidden from me. And I realized people can be very isolated by things out of their control, and I can't always rely on my own friends. So I started Googling a lot. Basically, I said, what's out there studying loneliness and isolation, am I the only one going through this sort of thing where I can't find people to take care of me after I've been in the hospital? And it's so hard to pin people down to, when you really need real hands-on support. And so I discovered the loneliness quiz and all the studies on AARP back in 2012. And it actually was helpful for me. That was my first experience, was seeing the big picture and not just blaming it all on myself and seeing this as a one person, issue, but AARP and that loneliness quiz really helped me put it all in perspective. And I actually started turning my life around after taking that quiz and realizing, just like what Stu said, we're all one of the lonely people. It helped normalize for me. And so to normalize and see yourself as accepted, and it helped me break out of the shame. And that's so much of what we're doing today, is helping people feel that this is part of something so much bigger. So the quiz
Okay.
really helped me.
Yeah, me too. I took it 2 years ago. I'll share my score as of last night when we do this. Okay, question 1. Again, give yourself a score of 1, 2, 3, or 4 based on these answers. Hold on one second, folks. I just am having a hard time seeing them. You see it, so go ahead and read that question to yourself and give yourself a score of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Mike and Bo, I'm going to just do it here manually so I can see it on the screen. Okay, first question. How often do you feel unhappy doing so many things alone? If it's never, give yourself a 1. Rarely, give yourself a 2. Sometimes, give yourself a 3. Often, give yourself a 4. Let's go right to question 2. How often do you feel like you have no one to talk to? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Always, give yourself a 4. Question 3. How often do you feel you cannot tolerate being so alone? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Always, 4. Question 4. How often do you feel as if no one understands you? Oh boy. Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Always, 4. Okay, question 5. How often do you find yourself waiting for people to call or text? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Always, 4. Okay, we're halfway there. Question 6. How often do you feel completely alone? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Often, 4. Question 7. How often do you feel unable to reach out and communicate with those around you? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Always, 4. Question 8. How often do you feel starved for company? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Always, 4. Almost there, folks. I know I'm going kind of fast, but question 9. How often do you feel it's difficult for you to make friends? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Often, 4. And last question, number 10. How often do you feel shut out and excluded by others? Never, 1. Rarely, 2. Sometimes, 3. Always, 4. So, add up your scores, and if we could go to the next slide. I'm just going to run through the totals real quick. Sorry, guys. And then we'll come back. Val, I'm going to ask you your score. So I'll tell you that at the beginning of this project, my score was about a 34 in the extreme loneliness range. And through some lifestyle changes, I've taken it periodically over the course of this 2 years. As of yesterday, I got it down to a 30. Now I'll show you what that means here. If we can just show the scores. If you scored 0 to 10, you have little or no loneliness. Congratulations. What's your secret? 11 to 20, normal amounts of loneliness. That's some loneliness is a good thing. I'm sure Val will explain. 21 to 30 is moderate loneliness, and you may want to consider some lifestyle changes. And I'll tell you that for most of the people that take this quiz on our website, this is where we fall into. And finally, 31 and over is extreme or severe loneliness. And so those are some of the, you might face some of the issues like Victor does, where it's just getting harder and harder to break the cycle of loneliness. So I've outed myself with my score, and I've said I'm lonely. I'm moderately lonely now. Val, do you want to join the campaign to break the stigma?
Right. So I'm about 25 in moderate zone, but there were times last year during the pandemic when I wasn't able to work the way I wanted to work with people and do the things that make me feel connected, get the warm fuzzies, so to speak, you know. So I was way over 30 for some months of last year. But since I've been vaccinated, I will say that I'm able to work a little bit in person with a few people, and it's making a huge difference. So I'm just putting it out there.
So who would like to share their score in the chat? This is why we're making this film, to break the stigma of saying I'm lonely. And the more people that share their higher scores, the more we're all part of this campaign to ease social isolation and loneliness. So while more of you take the plunge and post your score, Rebecca, I know that you had a great video. We'd love to take a look at it if this is the right time, or what would you like to do at this point?
Do we do with that gift, or sometimes it doesn't feel like a gift of time? And I understand, based on many of your responses to those registration questions, yes, we did read those great responses to your registration questions, that many of you do have strategies that you use to get beyond a wall of loneliness. You're part of online groups, and one of you even established a birdhouse painting club and invites others to see the birdhouses. We know Stu's magic wheelchair kind of exciting fantasy of volunteerism. There's all sorts of ways we can step outside of our own box. And in my work with AARP, we rely heavily on volunteers to deliver our social impact mission of empowering people to choose how they live as they age. Who can't get on board with that? This very event here was in large part inspired by volunteers. Right now, behind the scenes, we have volunteers working to make this event possible. So I would like to share with you some gold, and that is a clip of our North Carolina Volunteers in Action, and hopefully that inspires something in you.
I work with a wonderful bunch of people here who love to give back, and that's why we're all volunteers.
The pen pal that I have is 92 years old. We exchange letters. I hope that continued connection with her will make her feel included.
One of my goals of volunteering is I want to learn.
I wanted to facilitate or put myself in a place where I could give back or share my experience and my combination of effort to give people of my age group an opportunity to connect with their own possibilities as a person and as a creative being.
To be accepted as a volunteer and be able to contribute means a lot to me. It means I've finally got my footing in the caregiving community.
I hope that we volunteers can continue to work together, learn together, and of course play together as we extend the AARP message of hope and brightness and goodwill.
I love the video, Rebecca. Are you there? I mean, we see so many innovative approaches like that. People, this is an opportunity for people to like put on their thinking caps and come up with the coolest ideas. We've found so many of them, and I'm so proud of what you all are doing there.
Well, what's heartening to me is to see that when our volunteers get together, they create something magical that has never been there before. And there are all sorts of programs like the Pen Pal program that was mentioned that was just created by our volunteers to reach out during the pandemic to people who weren't connected to technology. I could give so many examples of these types of programs. The intergenerational theater opportunity I mentioned, our volunteers literally design, run, and implement all of it. It's rare to see my face on one of these events. It's usually our team members. So in addition to the magical wheelchair or some of the other great ideas that have been shared, I want to encourage and invite people watching today to consider volunteering with AARP. We'll have a link for you at the end of this event today. So I will go ahead and turn it back over to you, Stu, to introduce the next video clip.
This is perfect because from our documenting, it's clear that volunteering, even if just doing a random act of kindness, is enormously connecting. You know, if we were to do this film in 30 seconds, I would say volunteer. But it's more complicated than that because it's not just an outside job. As we've also found with all the people who we're following, they're reducing their social isolation and loneliness by doing inside work. It has required them to personally change their outlook. And that's a tough one. So it's been tough for me. Let me show you two people who have changed my outlook a little bit. This clip has never been seen before. We're excited to show it to you. And again, please participate creatively. And with your comments, we will take them to heart as we finish the editing process. So we're lucky enough to be following another thought leader on social isolation and loneliness, Dr. Carla Parasanotto. Now, she's a researcher, she's a geriatrician, but what's cool about her is she's also boots on the ground making house calls as a doctor in her own neighborhood. And one of the people that has amazed her the most, and is amazing us as well, is a woman named Carla, who by all accounts, I'm sorry, Carol, not Carla. I get them confused, but by all accounts, Carol should be lonely. You'll see why, and let's try to unravel why she's not. Here's Carol.
Okay, my name is Carol Hill, and I'm 77 years old, and I'm stuck in bed because I have a weakness in my legs. I don't know what they call it, but anyway, I've been in bed now going on 5 years.
Hey, Carol.
How have you been?
Oh, I've been okay.
Good.
I'm glad it's Friday, although I have to work tomorrow still.
You do?
I do.
So when I first met her, she is exactly the type of person that I thought, this is someone who's at huge risk of being in a nursing home and doesn't want to be in a nursing home. That being said, I mean, she's always smiling. She's always hopeful. It's just completely unbelievable. She does not complain about things.
That means you're starting to move it a little bit better. Okay, great. Oof.
Yeah, that's
Crickety crack.
He can't stand that. He be frowning up.
Yeah.
I said, you're a therapist. You can't stand a little cracking.
You know, and this is kind of what led me to this type of research and to understand how does loneliness and isolation affect people, because many people in her condition would not be able to live the way she does.
You know, I think it's the mood that people be in. Some people are moody, you know what I mean? And they just don't want to see nobody sometimes. Me, I'm always open to see people. I speak to them, or laugh and talk with them. So I think they take to that because usually
It's people like her that remind me of what resilience is. And so if I can dork out for a minute, some of the meta-analyses that look at why interventions work and which ones work, some of the strongest evidence is for
that inner piece that we do as work, like our inner part in terms of how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our relationship in the world. It's that cognitive work that's so important that actually has really good evidence for. And so I think Carol is someone who has very good internal dialogues.
I just can't stand moody people, but that's the way they are, and you can't change them. So.
What about people in general?
People in general are usually my friends. Yeah. Even in the hospital,
there is this positive outlook that is probably part of why she does well. There's no pill equivalent for that.
So easily said, right? Carol's got the magic. She's got the trick. Val, Rebecca, how do we have outlooks like Carol's?
I think sometimes if we call it positive attitude, we might not be specific enough with what really drives us to have more courage, or if you like, a more positive outlook. So let me talk about, in my studies, 4 driving forces that we can tap within ourselves that often will help us break out of isolation, or even, as she calls those, bad moods, help lift us out of a mood. One of them is following your curiosity or your love of learning, your interest in others, the bigger world out there. So when you follow your learning, that motivator there, or that curiosity of yours, it might get you to break out of your shell a little bit, take a class somewhere, join a group that's studying something you really care a lot about, that you want to learn a lot about. So that's following your curiosity. That can pull us out of ourselves, not just being positive, but like, boy, that really fascinates me, Another is following your caring for others. And we've talked a lot about volunteering, but helping others makes us feel less helpless. And as sometimes taking a role as an advocate or helping others who might be even more isolated and lonely than you are can really lift us out of our own loneliness. So caring and helping is another huge driving force for many of us. Another driving force is, they say, follow your bliss. There are enthusiasts out there who love music or love, mountain climbing or birds. And when you follow your joy or follow your bliss, including things you create and make, your poems or your books, all those kinds of things, following that too can draw you out. You just want to share it, And finally, following your own healing journey. I've worked a lot with really isolated people dealing through grief. And often, maybe a year or 2 later, they might want to join a hospice and volunteer or help co-lead like a peer support group for grief and loss. I know parents who've lost their own adult children to opioid addiction, who've turned it around and found a way to take their healing and turn it into purpose, and work on a healing journey with others by organizing support groups or joining up with other people. So I just want to throw those 4 big motivating forces out. I don't just settle for be positive. I think a lot of us need to dig a little deeper and look at what pulls us out, what makes us brave, what gives us whatever that gets us past that social evaluative threat where we have to get past that nervousness.
Yeah, I'm curious about those who are joining us today. Like, help us understand. We are overcoming our loneliness by doing things like this. By trying to engage with our community and create meaningful opportunities. So, what are you curious about? What is your bliss? Because I guess volunteering or any engagement like that should be something that's really feeling that deeper meaning, not just, being positive. I appreciate your reflection, Val.
I do want tell you a little secret about Carol. It goes back to our faith-based answers before, but she is a very, I'm not going to just say faith-based person or spiritual person. She is a very religious person, and her connection to her church provides her with a real break from a real safety net from social isolation. So I know that's a really controversial topic, but there have been some studies that have shown that people who are part of a congregation of some kind have interactions with people 40% more than those of us that may not. So I wouldn't be telling the whole truth if we weren't Carol would not be pleased with me if I didn't mention that. So do we have any questions, Rebecca? Do we want to?
Yeah, let me check. And thank you for keeping the spirit of Carol here with us. I don't see that we have any questions, and I think, so that we have time, let's go ahead and see that last clip. This has never before been revealed. Is that right, Stu?
This one has not been seen that much. Carol it was her premiere here tonight. So some of the solutions that the folks we've been following are in this next clip of a montage of some of the community approaches that we're finding around the world. A lot of them are easily, I say, emulatable. They're not too expensive to do in communities where you are. And let's take a look.
We are sort of like a skills shed, if you like. The main purpose of it is a meeting place for men.
Many Sheds has been a godsend to me.
I mean, personally, I lost my wife. I lost her 2 years ago.
It's a motivation for me to move.
I came across the Sage table, and it was like, oh, that's a really cool idea.
The LGBT community is so...
Sage table is intergenerational LGBT people getting together and talking and having a meal, and we decided to do it as a potluck.
26
Loneliness and isolation is one of the more underlying reasons why people are exploited financially. And that's really where the Chat Bench initiative came to life. Just stick the sign on a bench. You can sit on the bench yourself and encourage people to have a chat, or just launch it into the world and stick the sign on a bench and see what happens. It's been replicated elsewhere because it is simple.
Although our Asian communities live with the extended family, they're all out at work and the elders are left at home day in and day out. And a community member, she said, I want to set up a Asian women's group.
Hi, Tom.
Oh, hey, Carol. How are you?
The GrandPad is a simplified iPad.
Very well, very well.
She had talked to Tom, but when you see someone face to face, and that's what a technology like GrandPad can do, it's a different type of interaction.
Yes, yes, that's fine.
When people are really feeling isolated, sometimes they can spiral medically in ways that you can see that early, that something's starting to go on. Their mood seems to be down.
I'm on paid this weekend with the Canada Standards. How did you meet your husband? On a radio
I said, I'd like to be a telephone buddy. And it's one of the best things I've done, because we're on about loneliness, but I live on my own.
I listen mainly on my iPad. Oh, do you? On YouTube, yeah.
I dread to think if I was stuck in my flat and I couldn't go out and meet people. Yes, I hope I give something to somebody, but also they give to me.
How are you getting on? I'm all right.
We didn't have any clubs that we could go to.
Come on, Jeff!
There's age difference, you've got 55, you've got 85.
They've loved football all of their life. But being the age that we are, it's walking football.
No running!
Yes, so we're not allowed to run because at our age of over 55 plus, it's probably deemed best not to.
We've got 4 octogenarians. It's taken away the isolation for me. I live in a tiny village now with only 40 houses.
So I want to be like those guys when I'm an octogenarian. We have found no shortage of innovation around breaking social isolation and loneliness around the world. And you hear a lot of English accents there, or British accents, and that's because they are just a little bit ahead of us in terms of getting into action on this. There's been a lot of movement here in the United States around it. However, if you want to see community action at that level, it's frankly, it's a little bit easier to find there right now. And we're hoping through our social impact campaign to be part of the spark of it here, because now is the time coming out of the pandemic. Let me turn it back over to Val and Rebecca.
Chime in on that. The pandemic has really given us a good reason to reach out to others and check in with others on a regular basis. How are you holding up? And it feels a little less shameful and embarrassing to be isolated and lack support now. And also, as we were talking about, maybe we aren't quite as embarrassed if we feel socially awkward going back to our offices or getting back out there again. We can all feel that same awkwardness and have some acceptance for it rather than feel ashamed. Also, volunteering and giving back. I learned over and over from watching the people I've studied and through my work as a rehabilitation counselor for people in recovery, that giving back and giving support was a way of building support. You put it out there. It's a generative thing. It's proactive. And if anything, I just want to encourage everyone here that if you find the courage to be proactive, it really is what it's about. It doesn't just come to you, usually. Finally, checking in with people, even long lost people from your life from 10, 20, 30 years ago. Don't be shy about, you have a great excuse during this pandemic and coming out of it to say, hey, how are you doing after 20 years? So it gives us a chance to step right out of that reluctance or shyness. The pandemic's a good reason.
Wow, I'm always leaning in when Stu and Val are talking because there's so much richness there. And I don't know if you've seen it, Val, but there's really exciting comments in the chat about ways which your messages have been inspiring people to share about the things that they've been doing. And so, I feel like maybe some of you are waking up to a new possibility. I know I am inside of the conversation, like waking up to what's already here available for me. And some of that is just being genuine with people, that authenticity and acknowledging sometimes that we maybe need support. I love when Val said sometimes we have to give the support to get the support that we need. And I think that is so true. Mike or Bo, you can put up my slide now. I want to invite people in the chat to continue to write what's waking up for you right now. What do you see as maybe being possible? What are you inspired by and to do next after this? We don't want this to be a one and done experience with you. That's AARP, Blue Ridge Pride, Stu and Val. We're kind of on the journey. So some things I would like to leave you with, the slide there, and you can make these slides bigger, smaller with the box in the right-hand corner. One is, stay connected with AARP in North Carolina. See our upcoming events. Every week we have many creative events designed by staff and volunteers, designed to cultivate connection. Then, really a call to action around that volunteering, and you'll see the link there. They're all pretty easy to remember because they're the aarp.org/, NC volunteer. I do want to point you to that intergenerational theater experience just because it's so wonderful. It's coming up early June, and you do need to apply. It's going to be virtual. So it's going to be a safe place to go deeper into some of our values that we share across generations. This version is designed for the LGBTQIA community. And also there is the Blue Ridge Pride website there where you can find information. We have monthly Pride Time chats in the evening. We also have monthly Facebook Live events showcasing people who inspire us. Stu was on there in May. So check out the Blue Ridge Pride page also. I will invite my friends Val and Stu back as we start to bring our event towards a close here, and tie it together as neatly as and imperfectly and as we can.
Val, go ahead.
Well, I had done kind of my little list, but I want to say something to break us out. There's this whole idea of finding community or finding your tribe. And I kind of go, I shouldn't do that, but you know what? That might put us in a box and put limits on us to find your community. I'd rather say it's about building it. It's about putting it out there. Just like when you look at Carol, I feel so welcome just hanging out with her, and I'm not even with her. But she puts me in that place where I feel like I could welcome people around me in the same room. You know, generate that welcoming attitude. If I could copy her just a little bit, I'd take that around with me, that Carol vibe. I think I turn my world into a community instead of seeing it as just something I'm looking for. She creates it.
That is so well put. Create your community, don't just go looking for it. Okay. For my part, I got to say, I feel so connected right now. This is kind of my little personal solution is filmmaking and doing social impact work and partnering with organizations like and people like you, Rebecca and Val. So thank you everyone for going down this road with me, all of us, and let's keep on going down it together. These clips and the film are part of a much larger social impact project I keep mentioning that we're doing to take away the stigma of saying I'm lonely and get communities to help those around them who are socially isolated. These presentations have already begun. The film should be done towards summer. And the feedback that we've gotten has been so helpful. And soon we'll be on the road with the completed documentary. And how cool would it be for all of us to get together again? And you can point out the part where you helped us with that. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. I hope each of you will keep in touch with me personally. My email is on the website, allthelonelypeoplefilm.com. It's probably in the chat. And meeting you is how I'm staying connected. Bye for now.
Bye.